So here we go. So welcome everyone to Why Have Student Wellbeing Ambassadors webinar by me and Hannah Wilson from Diverse Educators. Do you want to briefly introduce yourself, Hannah, before we do the full blurbs about who we are?
Sure. It's lovely to be here, everyone. I'm an ex-head, passionate about mental health and wellbeing, but also diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, as Liz said, I'm the director of Diverse Educators, and I want us to think about the intersectional approach to mental health and wellbeing, and not to have one person leading on DEI and one person to be leading on mental health and wellbeing, but thinking about the intersect between the two.
So Hannah and I have teamed up with our organisations, and we have met over the years, and our paths have crossed because we're like-minded, and so I thought, well, let's team up and promote this program. And my business partner's just ringing me on the phone. Obviously, he's forgotten that I'm doing a webinar at 4 o'clock. So I'll fire away. So you've signed up for this webinar because you're looking for effective ways to develop the well-being of the young people that you work with. You are looking for some solutions to support young people struggling with mental health problems. Maybe you're really aware of this is a challenge for you. Well, it's a challenge for everybody, but maybe there's some stuff going on in your school or setting that's making you a bit worried about this, more than normal. Awareness of effective approaches to develop peer-to-peer well-being. Even in I think the transformation plan, the mental health and wellbeing transformation plan, green paper, they talk about peer wellbeing or peer mentoring as an intervention, but they're very non-specific about what that entails and how to do it. And you're also looking to understand that a little bit more, understand how young people can lead wellbeing interventions, and that will make a real difference to their school or setting. So I have to give you the caveat that this is aimed at secondary school age young people. Lisa, I know you're primary. However, do not fear. Some of it's relevant for all children and young people, really. It's just the program that we're talking about has been designed for teenagers. However, some primaries are doing it and just tweaking it slightly for the older, like years 5 and 6, because just some of the content is not developmentally appropriate for younger children, just because they just don't have that cognitive ability yet. That's the only reason why it's focused on secondary. And our experience is mostly with directly working with young people in secondary schools or the community teenagers, but we also work with primary schools, like we have worked with Lisa's school a few years ago. So it's not suitable if you're looking for a quick fix, because this isn't a quick fix. You don't believe young people can be empowered to develop their own solutions. So how I describe it is, if you want the young people to follow your agenda, so that's not what we do, and you don't want to provide proactive prevention. I don't think anyone doesn't want to not provide it. It's just sometimes they don't know how to, and they're too busy firefighting to see that, you can't see the wood from the trees, to know what to do or how to make a start. It can feel very overwhelming, and you aren't willing to trust young people or empower young people to find their own solutions, because this is all about young people leading their own wellbeing initiatives in their schools or settings. And if you stay on the end, you'll find out about our promotion that we're doing at the moment, because the price is going up on Saturday. It's the last chance to get it for last year's price, but it's this year's program, if that makes sense. So about Worth It, just a quick thing about me. And I'm Liz Robson-Kelly, CEO of Worth It. I'm an organisational positive psychologist and qualified master's level coach that specialises in whole school approaches to positive education, intervention and prevention, utilising positive psychology and coaching psychology. I'm also a university teacher at Loughborough University in work psychology, so organisational psychology. And we started Worth It when we were providing targeted support and coaching in the community for at-risk young people. I had this idea that young people, if they just knew how to use coaching, that it would help prevent mental health problems. And that was 10 years ago. It sent me off on this career path, and I did a master's degree. My research got published. And we've worked with around 5,000 directly, so through workshops or coaching programs or training. I've actually lost count of how many young people we've actually worked with. And the indirect impact is hundreds of thousands. Because if you think about, if you lead transformation in a school, like how big was your school? How many kids were in your school, Hannah? Over
Oh, it
1,000?
was no, it was a startup school,
Oh
so
yeah, you
I
only
only
had one
had
year group.
360.
But if it was at full size,
Oh, it would have been 1,500. Yeah.
yeah. So if you think about, if you transform a school community of 1,500 young people and you change that culture forever, that's every kid that goes to that school now and every kid in future. So the indirect ripple effect is hugely significant, but really hard to count. So at one point we tried to work it out and it's about 40,000. It's more than that now though. I've totally digressed. And then we've coached around 300 young people directly, actually coaching them. And we've pioneered the approach of integrating positive psychology coaching to prevent mental health problems in young people, and worked with around 50 schools just on the Wellbeing Ambassadors Programme over the last 6 years, how it's been created. And we also worked in partnership with Bedford Local Authority and the Public Health Early Help team as part of the Trailblazer for the CAMS Link teams, if you know what they are. They're something that the government are pushing forward now. And York also were a CAMS Link team, and they had the school wellbeing service, they called it, in York. So we devised a program with them. All of that stuff I learned and have adapted and made the Wellbeing Ambassadors Programme what it is through all this projects over the last 6 years, and work and having the lots of schools do the program. Hannah, over to you.
Sure. So, Diverse Education started out as a grassroots network. So, I co-founded Women Ed 6 years ago. Off the back of Women Ed, we've got BAME Ed, LGBT Ed, Disability Ed. But when I was a head, I'd left London to move to Oxfordshire. And Benny Carver, who some of you might know from Twitter, who writes about diversity, we were working together, and we co-founded Ed, a joint a coherent, cohesive conversation about DEI. So we've got an intersectional community network of educators who care about DEI, but with very different lived experiences. Because in the Equalities Act of 2010, there are 9 protected characteristics, and a single issue approach isn't helpful, because like Benny's got 4 protected characteristics in her identity, and that connectivity between them is really, really important. So we create safe spaces for conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I'm really interested at this intersect between DEI, mental health, and well-being. And part of it is thinking about like psychological safety and identity, and how our identity shapes how we show up in the world. And for those of us who haven't got the protected characteristics, I'm a straight, white, able-bodied woman. I'm really aware of that. I position myself as being inclusive. How can I support people who have got those other experiences, and be an ally for their experience? Having worked in a lot of schools in South London, where I was quite often the only white person in the room, a lot of young men, black men, struggling with their mental health and well-being, really thinking about that overlap between the two.
And I've never heard this term inclusivity ally until Hannah said it earlier on the webinar earlier, but our work at Worth It is definitely around being an inclusivity ally. We're not strictly about inclusion. Our approach is about fostering belonging and self-awareness and self-acceptance and self-worth. That's why we call Worth It. And to feel accepted is kind of an outcome of that, of working on that deeper layer of stuff, I suppose. So that's where we've come joined forces, isn't it, Hannah?
Mm-hmm.
So mental health problems are a ticking time bomb. I describe it as a tsunami. I don't know if the tsunami started to hit you yet in your schools, but it is coming. Jack's nodding. The tsunami is hitting him. And earlier we were talking about how we've heard examples of lots of schools saying that more young people are suicidal or having suicidal ideation. More young people are self-harming. It was bad before, do not get me wrong, things were bad before, but COVID and lockdown and removing young people from their connections, from their friends, has done a lot of harm, and I'm really, really worried about it. So the statistics are now that 1 in 6 young people are at risk, have a diagnosable mental health problem. Before, like in 2004, it was 1 in 10, and then they didn't do a prevalence study for 12 years, and then it was done in 2017, and it was 1 in 8, and now it's 1 in 6. So it's a rapid increase and deterioration. And I feel like I'm getting on my soapbox. The government have damaged adolescents' mental health. They really have. And so we need to do something about it. And this is a solution. This is a way of helping. It's not the only way. There's many ways. That this is a young person-led approach that will make a significant difference and does make a significant difference. But not just to mental health and wellbeing, like Hannah said, to that inclusivity, that intersect between the two areas. So Hannah, what makes a young person more at risk?
So there's lots of research out there about the at-risk groups who are potentially more vulnerable. And I say potentially because I don't want us to assume that anyone who's got a protected characteristic is having a mental health issue. But there's research that shows that kind of like intersect with young people who are grappling with their self-identity, who have self-esteem issues, who are seeking that social acceptance. And as Liz said, that comes from self-acceptance, and who perhaps don't have a sense of belonging. And the groups who are more at risk from the last year are children from diverse backgrounds, children of colour, and LGBTQI, because schools were their safe space. And then during lockdown, they've potentially been in an unsafe home where they've had to suppress that part of their sexual orientation or their gender reassignment. And we've had a massive spike in trans young people trying to take their own lives, a massive the increase of BAME children of colour being referred for mental health and wellbeing. And I think, I don't want to stereotype here, but the schools I've worked in, there is quite a lot of stigma sometimes in some of the Black communities around mental health and wellbeing. And when you do escalate or refer someone on, I've had to do a lot of work with the families and the parents and the carers about accepting that support. So there's a piece there around the cultural, racial kind of context. So thinking about the 9 protected characteristics, and some of them are visible and some of them are hidden. So the visible ones would be race, religion, if there is an article of clothing or iconography you wear. So they're perhaps a bit more obvious to spot. The hidden ones are perhaps more problematic. So those young people who are sort of like coming to terms with their own sexual identity, whether that's LGBTQI or non-binary identities, or that gender reassignment that they're exploring. So we don't always know going through that self identity kind of process. And I think by creating safe spaces with safe people to have those conversations, that's when these things begin to get surfaced. And that final line around the kind of the risk factors is that young people who have got a protected characteristic have a potentially increased rates of rejection. So young people who are coming out and they might not be accepted by their families or their friends. Increased rates of discrimination, where that external prejudice then gets internalized and can manifest itself as mental health and well-being, and also potentially victimization, where young people are being bullied or receiving hate crimes based on their protected characteristics. So those kind of behaviours and lack of inclusion or exclusion can really detrimentally impact the mental health and well of a young person.
Yeah, and it's just like I was saying earlier, like it aligns with my research and my so I did a grounded study into what can coaching offer young people who are at risk, and I don't think any of those young people were actually of an ethnic background. Oh no, I think one or two. One was mixed race. Some of them were on the autistic spectrum, and some of them were definitely questioning their sexuality. And they identified that it was 3 things that helped them. One is self-awareness and emotional awareness. Self and emotional awareness is one thing. Thinking skills and the ability to have positive outlook, the ability to use helpful thinking, and communication and interpersonal skills. And as Hannah's saying, if young people don't feel safe to be themselves and express themselves and communicate to people that will understand them, it is going to sort of eat away at them and spiral downwards. So it is around their abilities in context specific situations. Yep.
Can I add something about data as well? So, do you mean quite often the data we have in schools, we can cite the number of young people who have a mental health and wellbeing concern, but we don't then sort of really drill down and look at the number of boys, the number of children of colour, the number of kids who are on the SEN register. And because quite a lot of the protected characteristic data isn't collected in a school context, we don't look at what that data is really telling us. And if I can just translate that to an adult context, when I left headship, I ran a PGCE for a year, and I had 450 trainee teachers. And when I looked at the data from the year before of the 40 adults who had become vulnerable during that teacher training pathway, every single one of them had a protected characteristic. But that hadn't been picked up by the university. So they weren't really considering the kind of the identity piece within the mental health and wellbeing piece. So I'd really encourage you to look at the data and really sort of like look at the subgroups within the data as well.
So we did a project in Bedford a few years ago, 3 years ago. And do you know what was really weird? So I was putting this stuff together, and one of the schools just out of the blue phoned me. She said, "Oh, hello, we're ready for an update." It was 3 years ago when we did the training. I was like, "Oh, how's it going?" She's like, "It's amazing." We're still doing it now. We still do it every year. The young people love it. They love getting their certificates. It's brilliant. It was a project in Bedford with 11 schools, and it was a slightly bigger program than the program we do now. And the reason why we don't do it as big as we used to do it then is because not every school has got the capacity to do a 2-day training course for young people and implement like one-to-one intervention. So that's why I changed it to be much more informal, which I'll talk about later. But what this research, not research, so what we did in this particular case is we did a year 7 control group, which is very rare that we have the ability to do a control group. So it was when a group of year 11s or year 12s were trained up to be wellbeing ambassadors, and they were supporting in a one-to-one mostly, but sometimes more informally. Sorry, someone just needs letting in. More informally, mentoring kind of relationship. This measurement on the left, so it shows that the self and this is our resilience scale. So the self and emotional awareness went up, the thinking skills went up, and the communication and interpersonal skills went up after the intervention. And on the right hand side, we've got the control group, the year 7 control group. So what that shows us is that the young people that didn't have a mentor or didn't get, didn't benefit from another young person supporting them, their well-being went down. So they were just left on their own with no support, whereas the younger peers, where the well-being went up, all of them increased their wellbeing levels using the Sterling Children's Wellbeing Scale. So this was used officially validated measure. And actually, it's not that the young people that didn't have the support nothing happened. It actually got worse, which is quite significant. The thing with early prevention is that you can think, oh well, we don't know if it's going to work, but it's like doing nothing is definitely not going to work. So it's better that it's the way you think about prevention. So thinking about support, when you think about the support in your school or setting, is it, is people's mentality around removing or reducing issues? So is it about stopping them being stressed, stopping them self-harming, stopping bullying, stopping racism? Is it about a kind of deficit approach, or is it about promoting and building capacities for well-being? Does anyone want to share anything? Or Hannah, do you want to say something about your school?
Yeah, I'll just add. So, I mean, the lens I always used around this work is it needs to be preventative and proactive and preemptive rather than reactive and responsive. I've worked in schools in my career where someone has anxiety in year 9 and they get yoga, or someone starts self-harming in year 10 and they get a referral, and it was always very like crisis driven, and I felt like we were doing a disservice and we weren't really building that toolkit of mental health and well-being and resilience every person had an entitlement to then draw on. So when I became a head teacher of a startup school, we had a pledge that every young person would be equipped with the resources and the kind of the skills that when they needed them, they had the breathing techniques, they had the mindfulness, they had the different kind of things that would work for them. So I think that's how I've always approached it from a kind of a cultural point of view, that this should be holistic and a universal offer rather than just for a target group of vulnerable young people.
Yeah, and I think you know, when budgets are tight and the pressure's on, your attention goes to the ones that need it the most, the ones that shout the loudest, if you like, their behavior is so problematic, you have to do something about it. But if you are working in if you're changing your culture to promote capacities for well-being, first of all, you reduce the amount of issues, the escalation of issues is less, and you're increasing capacity to focus on the young people that do need that significant intervention from an adult. So what we're saying with this Wellbeing Ambassadors Programme is young people can be a catalyst or can help increase capacity to promote those capacities for well-being. And if you do that, it will reduce the amount of need for targeted intervention. You're always going to need to do targeted intervention for vulnerable young people that need more. But a lot of your lower level issues, friendship falling outs, she said this about me on Snapchat, all of that kind of stuff can be dealt with or supported by creating positive cultures, using your wellbeing ambassadors to share strategies for wellbeing with each other. So there's different types of prevention. I often use this to explain, because I always talk about intervention and prevention like everyone knows what I'm talking about. So I always try and explain. So using the metaphor of the river, we don't want to be fishing people out the river when they're already drowning. We want to stop them falling in the first place. So we have downstream prevention, which is kind of like typical firefighting. There's an issue, we've got to address it. So downstream prevention supports to try and cope with the consequences of harm. Like a lot of what's being put in place now because of COVID is downstream prevention. It's preventing things getting worse because there's already damage being done. Then we have midstream prevention, which is supporting to mitigate the effects of harm on a particularly at-risk group. So when Hannah's talking about her protected characteristics, you might know that they're an at-risk cohort. So you might put an intervention in place, especially for a SEN support group, or something around anti-racism or something like that. That would be a midstream intervention. And then we have upstream intervention, upstream prevention, which supports to aim to prevent harm before it occurs, and usually focus on whole populations and whole systems. So when you're working at a whole school level and your young people are leading wellbeing initiatives that transform the school culture, it's not a quick thing, it's going to take a bit of time. That's upstream intervention. That's stopping as many children falling in the river in the first place. Some are always going to fall in, but if we can stop less falling in, if we can help less fall in, it's just better, isn't it? So this is a helpful diagram to explain this. So this is the wellbeing and engagement framework. So this is an adaptation from another framework called the dual mental health model, where mental health and mental illness are on two spectrums. But really, this programme, it's about helping young people increase capacities for wellbeing and increase engagement at school, because they have a sense of belonging and they feel safe and they enjoy school. And we know that if children feel that they're connected to school and have good strategies for wellbeing, then they have less mental health problems. They have better wellbeing, better mental health. But if children are only connected to peer groups and not connected to schools, that's also not great for their well-being. So they need both in balance. So we have on the vertical axis is high mental well-being and low mental well-being. And what we're doing is we're trying to move young people up well-being spectrum using more strategies for mental well-being. Increasing those capacities for well-being, like I had on the pink circle, that's moving them up this spectrum here. And we're also trying to increase their engagement in school by creating a culture of belonging and positive relationships where they feel accepted and comfortable and safe and all of that stuff. When a young person has got low mental well-being, but also no diagnosable mental health problem, they're languishing, and a significant amount of young people are languishing. I think COVID has caused a lot of young people to languish because they haven't got these capacities for wellbeing to maintain their wellbeing through challenging times, so that their wellbeing is reduced, but they might not necessarily have a mental illness. And then we have functioning above that line. And then we have distressed and disengaged. So these are ones that you're really worried about. They're disengaging from school. They are also distressed, psychologically distressed. This means, they probably, you're trying to get help for them or make a referral to camps for them or something like that. Then we have distressed and functional, and these are quite a worrying group as well. These are your young people who are achieving academically, so they appear to be functioning, but they are distressed. So they're the ones that are freaking out at exam time, collapsing in the corridor, revising all night. They're not looking after themselves. And I'm very worried about that group of young people. And then we have the plodders who have low engagement, but their well-being's okay. They're all right, happy enough, not achieving their full potential, which I hate that terminology, but we use it a lot in this environment. So they're not working towards their strength. They have underplayed strengths. And then we have flourishing. So this is what we want young people to be: flourishing, which is feeling good, functioning well, good for you and good for those around you. But I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. Only around 18% of young people are flourishing, and it's probably less now thanks to COVID and the lockdowns. So, but also the scary thing is anyone that isn't flourishing is at risk of developing a mental health problem, because they don't have the strategies for well-being. So if they hit a bump in the road, or they haven't come across a challenging situation, there's nothing in their bank account to make a withdrawal. So I describe it like well-being capacity, developing capacities for well-being are like building a bank account. And if there's nothing in your bank account, you make a withdrawal, you go overdrawn. And a lot of young people are overdrawn right now. And we have to help increase their capacities for well-being by filling that bank account back up, teaching them this stuff, so that when they need to use it, they have something, they know what to do, they can help themselves. Do you want to say anything, Hannah?
Well, I just wanted to zoom into that word engagement, because I think we've got two things to think about here: engagement, the social engagement, those who have got that sense of belonging socially within a school context, and their sort of like social awareness. But then you've also got the learning engagement, and I fear that we've returned from Easter, and the focus is really on sort of like catch up, recovery, closing the gap, and it's all about learning engagement, and we're not really thinking about the mental health and the well-being. And if a young person isn't mentally well, they can't learn. And I think we should be focusing our attention actually on the kind of inclusive culture and the mental health and well-being piece, in order to prepare them for the learning piece. It's just my kind of perspective on it.
Yeah, I agree. And a stressed brain cannot learn. It's just not possible. Your brain's in fight or flight. Can you logically think about stuff? Not really. So anyone that's done my webinars before will see this. This is a really helpful way to explain well-being, because well-being is a bit of a difficult concept, often misunderstood, and not all about chocolate on a Friday. So well-being this is the dynamic model of well-being by the New Economics Foundation. Again, it's an evidence-based approach. So this purple dotted box is flourishing. So when a young person's flourishing, or when a person is flourishing, not just a young person, it means that they feel good day to day and overall. So that's not about feeling amazingly fantastic all the time. It's about most of the time, majority of the time, feeling contented, feeling happy. That warm central heating feeling is how I describe it. And it's not that they don't feel sad, it's not that they don't feel disappointed or difficult, challenging feelings, but it's that they can return back to this happiness set point, this contented level easily, and they can regulate that. And that they function well and their needs are met. So they feel safe and secure, they have friends, they are confident in their abilities, they make good choices that are good for them and good for those around them. So it's a presence of these positive capacities, and it's a lack of negative stuff as well. So there's no negative coping strategies either. So then we have, in order for them to develop this, so this is like feedback loops. So this is a dynamic thing. It's a system, it flows around. We have personal resources and strategies for developing, like I said, self-awareness, self-acceptance, thinking skills, and relationships. So when they learn that, that's teachable and learnable, and you can teach it explicitly, or they can experience it implicitly in a school culture and atmosphere. And when they do, it helps them function well and it helps them feel good, and it goes around like that. And then we also have the external conditions, and this is where the school environment comes in, and that feeling safe at school, like Hannah's talked about. You create the conditions that enable a young person to flourish. A lot of the approaches that are used are about in-person in child deficit models. Fix the kid's got the issue, they're the one, they just don't, they need therapy. But actually, if we create the environment that teaches them how to flourish, they will flourish within that environment. Do you know what I mean? Hannah, do you want to say anything
Well,
on that?
just that green and the blue box, like thinking about that relationship between the external and the internal, and the macro and the micro. We can't control the green, because what happens at home is out of our control, but we can empower the blue. And really build skills. One of the I've done in the last years, I've trained to be a resilience coach, and we talk about the fact that people quite often come to coaching too late. They come to coaching when they're in crisis, and actually resilience is about like that self-awareness when you're in a state of equilibrium, so that you can then draw down on that toolkit and those resources when you really need it. And I
Yeah,
think that's what I mean about being preemptive and proactive, that we're developing and flexing the skills and the resources and the understanding for when we need it, as opposed to trying to put a plaster on when it happens.
absolutely, because it's too late and it's much harder to do. And do you know there's no cure for mental illness? It's palliative. It's only about managing the condition there, but if you can prevent it, but you can't cure it. And anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. So there's a number of theories that underpin the Wellbeing Ambassadors Programme. One is peer-to-peer support, one is voice-led early intervention and prevention, positive psychology, and coaching skills and approach. So we've blended all four of these into a train the trainer program, a toolkit, and a workshop for you to deliver to your group of young people that you're going to train up to help the other young people develop well-being and create this culture of connection and belonging and safety, like we've been talking about. Did you want to say something about this?
I just got a question about, do they get the slides? I know they're getting the recording after
No,
this
they
year.
don't get slides. You get a one-page summary of everything we've covered on the slides.
Nice. I just think that some of them might want it to leverage that negotiation back at school. Well,
Yeah.
just to spotlight the yellow and the green ones. That I was an English teacher for 20 years, and I think literacy, but emotional literacy, is really, really important. And one of the things we did a lot of work on at my school was empowering young people to have the vocabulary to explain how they were feeling. And sorry to stereotype, but boys in particular, a lot of the boys in our school either said they were happy or they're sad. They couldn't articulate that continuum of how they were feeling. And I had boys on sort of like suicide watched me on mental health check-ins every day, and I think that voice-led activity is really key. And then the other thing we did was around coaching, was like, for those of us who are secondary school based, like you can feel quite lost in a tutor group of 30 kids when you've got 20 minutes with your tutor, and it's always at the wrong time of the day, and it's like loads and loads of like notices. So we built in coaching circles within our tutor groups, where all of the staff were deployed on a monthly basis, and we had a group of 5 to 6 children who we met. And I had sort of like 6 vulnerable year 8 girls, and what I got out of them in a half an hour coaching circle was much more high quality than what you get out of a tutor group of 30. So just thinking about those different ways we create and empower kind of the conversations.
Yeah. So I'll talk about some of the skills that are covered in the program in a moment. So Hannah, this is your slide.
Yeah, so Doreen, I believe that a lot of this stems from the kind of the culture and the ethos of the schools we work at, and we need to be really intentional and strategic about creating that culture of inclusion, because that culture of inclusion then creates that sense of belonging for everybody. And quite often we assume there's a culture of belonging, but there's not. There's individual groups who don't feel that sense of belonging. They don't feel heard. They don't feel seen. They don't feel empowered. So some of the things just to consider around the kind of the theory or the policy that it then informs the practice. Thinking about diversity, I think, is really important, because quite often the young people who are experiencing the issues, mental health and wellbeing issues, don't see someone like them to go to. And I'm not saying that if you are a gay child with mental health issues, you're only going to talk to an LGBT staff member, or a black child where you're going to find a black leader. But I think that not seeing themselves in the makeup can be a real barrier. So thinking about who the safe staff members are for them to go to, but being really mindful of how diverse is the team of pastoral support workers, for example. Then thinking about the school policies and practices, we like to think they're all inclusive, but quite often they're not. Quite often they inadvertently exclude or marginalise different groups. So thinking about how we can be really mindful and really aware of the diverse lived experience of different groups and the relationship that some of those groups have with mental health and well-being. As I said already, so there's research that shows that BAME communities are less likely to engage with a medical referral, for example. Then thinking about creating safe spaces. So thinking about those groups who potentially are at risk, who potentially are marginalised or aren't feeling that sense of belonging. So for example, I had an NQT who identified as being non-binary, and she asked if she could start a lunch club for LGBTQI young people, and that was a safe space once a week for people to go and talk about their sexual orientation. It wasn't a mental health group, but it then sort of like surfaced and could signpost resources for young people who were feeling anxious or who were feeling ill health. And then the kind of the peer advocacy piece about how we empower young people to be a buddy for another young person. So we had mindfulness as part of every morning. We did a lot around self-care strategies. And I shared an anecdote earlier on in the other webinar about the fact that like our young people could co-regulate each other. So quite often the young people come to an adult in the school to co-regulate their emotions. But I can remember seeing young people co-regulating each other. When someone was having an anxiety attack or kind of a panic attack, another young person could help them do their breathing and help them calm each other down. So I think there's something there about how we are creating human resources to actually enact and embody some of the policies and the practices we're considering here.
We've had similar scenarios where young people have noticed that a friend is really suffering, and a young person has been trained to be an ambassador, and they've noticed a peer in their class is suffering, and they've advocated for them. They've said, "I'm really worried about so and so. I think something's not right," and to the teacher and to the pastoral person, and they've acted, and actually it's ended up in that young person being referred to CAMS. So it's just that capacity to notice, and a child will understand, no, another young person will understand what a peer's going through more than an adult would notice. And teachers, you're so busy, you've got so much to do, you can't notice every child that's suffering or struggling, especially if they it's very subtle. It can be very subtle. So this is about teaching young people a framework, a set of tools, of resources based all on evidence-based approaches that enables them to lead well-being interventions, but quite informally. So the definition of a peer support program is that programs that are, sorry, I can't get my words out. Peer support programs are programs that train young people to help others learn and develop emotionally, socially, or academically. So they can be quite informal, or they can be more formal, like peer-to-peer mentoring. And it's quite funny. It was quite not funny, interesting. So government funded Anna Freud Centre. I don't know if you've heard of Anna Freud Centre, and they had a peer mentoring program, and they basically discovered the same thing that we discovered, is that the program was great, the training was great, the young people that were the mentors really appreciate it, but they couldn't get it off the ground in the school because it's like logistically, not going to say impossible, but pretty difficult to get two kids on different timetables in different year groups together at the same time, especially now. It's even more harder now. So in the end, it would take them like 6 months to just pair up one or two young people. If it was year 11, they'd be already gone in May revising. So they'd have 1 or 2 mentoring sessions. So I changed it, and I made it much more about using a coaching approach and letting the young people decide themselves how the peer support should look in their school or setting. And in some schools it's pop-up lunchtime drop-ins. In some schools it's around, like Hannah said, the protective characteristics, pop-up groups for SEN, or to do like racism, cultural celebrations of difference, all these. But the young people have decided what they need and what they want and what's going to help them. I've heard children like year 11s baking cakes with year 7s just to help them settle in and feel that they're connected to school, and then selling the cakes to raise funds to get an external speaker in. So there's all innovative ways, but all the ideas have come from the young people. Another one was, they had a washing line of pants, and with like wellbeing strategies on, and they say, if you feel pants, come and take the pants. See, that's, okay, it's just fun, but it makes it accessible. It's this conversation around well-being. It just makes it part of the everyday business of the school. So the benefits include positive peer relationships, belonging and connection, empathy, empowerment and ownership, access to support, and increased capacity. So I haven't talked about how, like Hannah said, having these human resources that are your children, your pupils, can actually increase capacity to support a lot more young people, which then frees up pastoral capacity to focus on the more young people that more need that targeted adult intervention, because a lot of your low level issues that then escalate and become big issues are taken out at the ground level. And yeah, I'm not going to it's going to take you a bit of time to get this up and running. It's a day's workshop for your pupils, or you can split it into, there's 5 hours of material for you to deliver to your pupils. You've got to prep that, about half a day prep, and then you've got to meet with them every few weeks, or every week at the, every week at the most, every 2 or 3 times 2 times a half term at the least, I'd say, to keep them going. But you're going to have then 16, at least we suggest 16 young people that are going to then be spreading like these positivity bombs around the school that are going to increase capacity. I've never used the term positivity bomb before, but I think it works. Yeah, so it does increase capacity, but it's a bit of, it's like anything, isn't it? Whenever you're trying to change something, you have to put a bit of effort in, and then it does self-sustain and grow after time. Voice-led then. So what I mean by a voice-led approach is that the young people are experts. As adults, we can often assume that we know what is best for them, and they are so different to us. Their experiences of growth, I mean, I'm in my 40s, they're so different. I didn't have a mobile until I was 21. Like, their life experience is so different, and they will find their own solutions if we ask them the right questions to help them figure out what their solutions are. So they're the experts on them, and they will know what would help somebody a few years younger than them more than we would know. If you're year 10 and you're saying, oh, what's going to help a year 7, they're going to know much more closely than an adult would, even if we think we know what's best for them. It's strengths based, which means we're helping them tap into the capacities and resources that they already have within them. So it's about how you combine the strengths of your group. So maybe some are really kind, maybe some are really outgoing, maybe some are your different makeup, like Hannah was saying. Make sure you select a representative group, so they're not all one type of young person. They are representative of the makeup of your school, so other young people can really recognize themselves in these peers, and they become wellbeing role models. And we had a lovely story of a school where the young person told another young person that a lad from year 7 told the I think she was year 11 girl, that she was his role model. No, she was his role model. Yeah. And it was really emotional. She was so overwhelmed that someone thought that about her. She never knew somebody thought that about her. Self-conscious adolescent girl, most of them are self-conscious and adolescent when they're in that, it's natural for a younger lad to say, I notice how you're so confident walking around, and I wish I was like you, and I just think you're amazing. Like, just how wonderful an opportunity to give that to young people, just share that with each other. And then it's around giving them an opportunity to share decision making. So as a school leadership team, you can ask your group of ambassadors, what do you reckon to these policies? Like, how does it feel at this school? And you can, depending on where you are and what you're developing as a school and your culture and stuff, is use your ambassadors to help shape that culture and shape that shared decision making. Do you want to say anything about these things? No?
No.
Oh, I'll just burp. So coaching is about helping. I love this definition of coaching. It's about helping people find real life solutions for real life problems. It's by Tony Grant. So the benefits include motivation, because they're finding their own solutions. It's really motivating. It's helping them to be resilient, and it's helping them have choice and control over how they want to think, feel, and behave, and choice and control over that environment that they're in. Confidence and capability, because as they're going through this process, they're developing their confidence and capabilities. Empowerment and ownership, because it's their baby, it's their project, they're passionate about it. And feelings of well-being. Do you want to say something about resilience, Hannah?
Well, I just think it's one of those things that everyone wants to develop resilience in young people, but no one quite knows how to do it. So actually, this is about sort of like creating that self-efficacy for each child to define what resilience means to them as well. And quite often we don't know how resilient they actually are, because we don't know their stories and their context. So I think it's about that ability to create that empathy for other people and show that compassion as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's several skills that are taught and learnt on the program. They're listening, non-judgmental, being motivated, being empowering, being supportive, being responsible, reliable, and being a good communicator. So when you're recruiting your team of ambassadors, they don't all have to have all of these skills, but amongst the cohort, you need all of them in a mixture, really. So and then they do activities based on coaching approaches where they practice these skills in the training. So it's a training workshop where they learn this stuff. And you, as a facilitator, have to think about how do you have these behaviors, and maybe what makes you the right person to lead the program, and bring those strengths out in the young people so that they can then use them to help other peers in the school environment. Hannah.
And just thinking about this ambassador piece, I think like I've worked in schools where it's the same young people all the time, being the student council and the prefects, but we then created champions and ambassadors for different things like anti-bullying and mental health being and diversity, and it gave other young people an opportunity to contribute and to be the change makers as well. And just wanted to spotlight here Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which we're all aware of. Thinking about how this speaks directly to mental health and wellbeing, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we tend to be very focused in on the physiological needs of our young people, and then their kind of like physical and emotional safety. But for me, that yellow tier about that sense of affiliation, that sense of belonging, is part of that cultural pledge that we make as being school leaders in schools, and that then leads to that sense of self-esteem, which then becomes self-actualization. So some of the things to consider around belonging is that visibility of people in staffing, that sense of acceptance. How are we creating the conversations around self-acceptance and social acceptance and cultural acceptance, and creating that kind of that space, I guess, to explore. But how are we empowering young people agency and that self-efficacy to actually find solutions to problems themselves, so they're not always dependent on the adults? And that psychological safety piece, like this phrase has come up a lot in the last year, around lockdown, around the Black Lives Matters movement, around some groups not feeling psychologically safe in society, in our school environments. I think it's something we need to be really, really aware of. Who feels safe and who doesn't feel safe, and why don't particularly feel safe? Because quite often the assumption has been made by the white, straight school leaders about the safety of individual young people. So part of that psychological safety is thinking about empathy, thinking about like being curious about what's going on, considering transparency, and like I do a lot around diversity, equity, inclusion, and creating listening spaces, and like truly listening deeply to what's being said and listening to what's not being said, and sort of like getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, because I think actually hearing from the young people what it is they want, not all school leaders want to hear.
Totally. And that's why, like I said at the beginning, if you're not in the right place to do this, then don't do it, because it would just disappoint a lot of young people. You have to be well ready to hear what they have to say and want to do something about that. But not that I'm saying it would be bad. It could be amazingly positive, but you want to use an appreciative approach and emphasize the strengths and turn those up rather than trying to reduce the deficits, I'd say. So practical next steps are, we are promoting the Wellbeing Ambassadors Programme. So it's something that we've had we've had for 6 years. And it used to be like just a load of resources that we'd send out and we wouldn't know what happened. And I changed it during lockdown to be a much more rigorous process. So it's an online program where you have like how to set the program up in your school, like with some downloadable posters and recruitment application forms, and how to get started, how to promote it, and all that kind of stuff. Then you have the materials and the background theory as well. Then you have all the workshop materials to deliver the workshop with your group of young people. So the actual train the trainer program, there's a manual with all the instructions of how to do the program, and also online course that goes with that. and then how to follow it up, because what can happen in a busy school environment is you all have a fantastic day doing the workshop with the young people, and then it fizzles out just because it's so busy and there's so much to do. So in order to support you as the facilitator, what we also do now is every half term Q&A calls where you can come on, get a bit of mentoring and from other facilitators in other schools and settings. So you're kind of peer mentoring each other on how to share ideas and share successes, troubleshoot any problems. And then also we have examples from other schools and the opportunity for you to be a spotlight school. So say that it's going amazingly well in your school, or there's a particular nuanced thing that you're doing. Like we've got an example of a school where it ended up being a really inclusive for special educational needs and autism, and it's just wonderful. And it was led by the young people. And you know, maybe that you've got a cultural project that's your wellbeing ambassadors are leading, or something quite unique, you know, a big celebration event or a market. Like we had York College, they had like a fair, like a wellbeing fair, and they had all like strategies for wellbeing, and people would come and take them off the pegs and things like that. So we want to celebrate your successes. We want to hear that effective practice, and schools really appreciate learning from each other. And what's amazing is the young people themselves could come on, do those example videos. They don't have to be the teacher. We want to hear from the actual young people themselves. So it's a 3-year license. It used to be just a 1 year. So the reason why we do 3 years is because we want it to be embedded and sustainable. And we want, you know, your current group of young people to help recruit the next bunch. So it can take you a good 6 months to get this going. So just doing it for 1 academic year, you're only just going to have got going. And so that's why we give it to you for 3 years. And it's 2 members of staff that get access, because you need help. It's not just one person's job. This is if you have a colleague that's helping you do the follow-up or deliver the sessions, then it's gonna be more effective that way. So if the price is going up on Saturday. So if you join before the 1st of May, you get it for the last year, you get it for the old price, but it's the new product. So it's much more than what you used to get for the same amount of money. So it's 625. It is going up to 945 on Saturday, on the 1st of May. So buy it now, get it for the discounted rate. I'd save £320. So like I said, you get a facilitators course. It's about 2.5 hours of online training. And the way we do it is you just click on, if you want to watch something again, or you want to recap, you can just click on that link and it will just play that bit of the video. There's a manual, there's an extensive facilitators manual, so you print it off and you have it with you when you're running your workshop in case you want to have a glance at it. And we're not like precious. You can tweak it, make it your own, bring your own slant on it. But you can do it word for word if you want to as well. And it helps you deliver a day's worth of workshops, but you can split into shorter sessions, or you can do remotely. Again, the Q&A calls can help you with that. And then it also helps you with the ongoing running of the programme through those Q&A calls every half term. And then you get all the materials to deliver the workshop with the young people, which is a downloadable workbook, which we've designed. This is it. This is the hard copy, which you can buy hard copies, but we've made it so you can download it, and we've done it white. The downloadable one's white, so you don't have to rinse all your ink. And it could be done in grayscale. It does look nice, colourful though. The young people do like the colourful version. And then you get all your activities that are part of the workshop, the slides, the materials, and then attendance certificates for you to fill in for the young people. And that's it. Well, there's so much more to it than that, but any questions? Any questions? Hannah, have you got anything you want to say at this point?
Well, I just popped in the chat. I was just thinking, if I was ahead still, who would I be targeting? And I suggested in the chat to think about current year 7s and current year 9s, because you could recruit them as ambassadors in the summer term and then start the training with them in September. And those current 7s who are 8s can then support the new year 7s, but the current 9s who are 10s could then do it for a whole year, because I appreciate your current 10s into 11 will probably be quite busy with their GCSEs come September and filling in the gaps. So I was just thinking about who I might target to be my ambassadors.
Yeah, and like I said, you don't have to start the program as soon as you are able to log into it. You can buy it now and just start doing the pre-work and understand it a bit more and start planning and deliver it in September. That's probably a pragmatic approach. But then you get it for 3 years, so you want to do it, then buy it now whilst it's cheaper. Also, you can use the COVID catch-up funding. You can use Pupil Premium, because this is about reducing barriers to learning. It's about increasing a capacity for young people to be able to learn as well. And also, they get all those skills that they can put on their CV or their college application, UCAS forms. Not, being an ambassador's amazing privilege. One school we did this in, they were like, I just think we'll just get a handful. 60 young people in just year 12. There's only year 12s that are invited to apply, and 60 applied to become the ambassadors. They wanted to do this.
Wow.
They want to help their peers, and they just were like relished it. But it also flagged up a lot of young people that actually were in need of support that they weren't aware of, because they were attracted to this project because they saw something in it that they wanted to help people, but actually they were the ones that needed the intervention themselves. So yeah, it just highlighted a lot of stuff. So yeah, if you've got any questions, we've got 3 minutes. If not, you can just type them in the chat. So yeah, we'll send you out an email with the one pager on, and on Friday we'll send out this recording, or this morning's recording, to just, if you want to watch it again. So if you're from primary school, or I haven't said this, is some primaries are adapting it and using it with year 5 and 6. But again, if you want to, because we do want to develop a primary version, but I just don't have the capacity to do that until till summer, probably for September. So if you want to do the program now, come on the Q&A calls and we'll help you adapt it. And there's just some of the language and terminology you might want to tweak to make it more younger. Just, that's my advice. Thanks. If you do have any questions, feel free to email us. We will send you a follow-up email with the one pager on it with the summary of today's webinar anyway. So thanks for your time, everyone. Thanks for joining me today, and hopefully you're more clued up about a young person-led wellbeing program now. So all the best. See you soon.